vast majority of my customer base is in the US. I can't pass this on to my customers. So as of last night, I've had to close my store completely. I won't be able to send you anything. Hopefully we can get this kind of figured out soon. I don't know what you guys are doing over there.
Big change overnight for people buying products from overseas. New tariffs took effect at midnight, closing a loophole affecting millions of international packages. And this morning, dozens of countries have suspended shipments to the U.S.
It's a big deal. It's a big scam going on against our country, against really small businesses, and we put an end to it.
A major shift has just rocked the ongoing trade war, one that's about more than just higher prices. Over 30 countries, including some of America's closest allies like Canada, Mexico, the UK, and Germany, have abruptly halted package deliveries to the US. The ripple effects are hitting hard, and even Amazon now finds itself on shaky ground. What triggered this sudden disruption? The abrupt cancellation of the duty-free exemption for packages under $800, a key piece of former President Trump's tariff policy. Overnight, what was once a seamless global shipping system descended into confusion and disorder. For years, Americans could easily order from abroad and receive packages at their doorstep. Now, that convenience is collapsing. But this isn't just a bureaucratic hiccup. It's a direct threat to the flow of global trade and your everyday shopping habits. What seemed like a simple policy change has shaken the very foundation of a system built on predictability. For decades, exporters, customs officials, and freight companies operated under clear, consistent rules. The $800 exemption wasn't just a perk, it was essential. Removing it without warning or transition threw the entire logistics world into chaos. No new procedures were given. Customs offices had no updated guidelines. Major carriers, everyone from parcel couriers to international shipping giants, were left scrambling, unsure of how to apply duties or advise clients. With no direction from Washington, many countries made a tough but understandable decision: pause all shipments rather than risk non-compliance. This wasn't an act of retaliation, it was self-defense. In global logistics, uncertainty is dangerous. And when the rules vanish overnight, so does trust. Timing, transparency, and cost control are everything in international shipping. Remove that structure, and the whole system starts to break down. And that's exactly what happened. Slowly but surely, the gears stopped turning. Factories kept making products. Warehouses kept sorting them. But the confidence that those goods would ever reach the US disappeared. Along with that confidence went the reliability of a system that once delivered over 4 million packages a day to American homes. Policy changes make headlines, but the consequences show up in more personal places. In abandoned shopping carts, in empty mailboxes, in missed birthdays and delayed holiday gifts. For the average American, this isn't a debate about economics or trade leverage, it's a sudden wake-up call. Packages that once arrived in days now go missing, are returned, or vanish entirely. And the prices? They sting. That $60 jersey from London might now cost over $200, if it even gets through customs at all. And while consumers feel the pinch, small businesses are suffering even more. For thousands of Etsy sellers, dropshippers, and independent retailers, their entire business model relied on one principle: source cheaply, ship quickly. That model no longer works. Every new order is a gamble. Every refund eats into margins. Every delay risks losing a customer forever. And in e-commerce, delay equals death. Now, just as the holiday season kicks in, the most critical time of the year for retail, the system is unraveling. This isn't just another quarter, it's the quarter. Black Friday, Cyber Monday, Christmas. For many businesses, these few weeks decide whether they end the year in profit or in debt. But with deliveries sputtering and systems breaking down, hopes are fading fast. The logistics network that once served as the bloodstream of consumer America is faltering. And behind that breakdown lies something deeper: a shift in how the world sees the US. For decades, America sat at the center of global trade. If Americans wanted something, the world bent over backwards to deliver it. But now, that certainty is eroding. Not through protests or loud declarations, but through quiet, decisive moves. Supply chains being rerouted, value streams redirected, priorities reconsidered. This is the kind of change that doesn't make daily headlines, but will shape the global landscape for years to come. As the shock settled, silence wasn't an option. Not for governments, not for corporations, and certainly not for the shipping giants caught in the middle. The global response wasn't dramatic. It was clear, coordinated, and firm. Take Canada Post, for example. For decades, it was a dependable part of cross-border commerce. But faced with a flood of packages and no legal clarity, their message was simple. We're not going down for someone else's mess, and that sentiment echoed across the globe. From European freight hubs to Indian exporters and small island nations, leaders were forced to do the math, and this time, the numbers didn't add up. Why should any government risk legal liability, failed deliveries, or unexpected tariffs just to serve a US market that no longer plays by consistent rules? The result was swift: halt deliveries. Not out of anger, but because staying in a collapsing system is reckless. Economically, diplomatically, legally. Behind closed doors, foreign ministries weren't just reacting to a trade spat. They were rethinking their role in a world where US dominance can no longer be taken for granted. The question isn't, how do we fix this? It's, do we even need this? And increasingly, the answer seems to be leaning towards self-preservation over cooperation. This isn't a temporary glitch. It's a fundamental shift. For years, the world's logistics networks were built to serve one truth: that the US was the consumer engine of the world. That truth is now being reevaluated, quietly, systematically, and the implications will stretch far beyond this holiday season. Getting goods into the United States quickly, cheaply, and at scale used to be the rule of global commerce. But now, that system is being disrupted from within, and countries around the world are responding by shifting their focus elsewhere. They're pouring investment into regional trade routes and rethinking their dependence on the US market. What started as a practical adjustment by foreign governments is quickly turning into something much bigger: a geopolitical shift. This shift is redefining who sets the rules of global trade and who must adapt. In the past, a disruption of this scale would have triggered emergency negotiations and back-channel diplomacy. But this time, the response has been notably quiet. That silence says it all. The world isn't waiting for the US to fix the problem. It's simply moving on. To understand just how deep this disruption goes, look at the industries quietly bleeding behind the headlines. E-commerce, once hailed as the jewel of global capitalism, is now caught in a chokehold. Its power came from speed and global reach. But now, without the cross-border shipping infrastructure that once delivered 4 million packages a day, that strength is turning into weakness. What good is an online store when the logistics behind it are crumbling into paperwork and uncertainty? What used to be a seamless add-to-cart experience has become a risky gamble. Shoppers who once enjoyed the convenience of borderless commerce are now waking up to a new reality. Their carts may still be full, but the supply chains are broken, prices are rising, and no one can guarantee delivery, or even say when it might happen. And this isn't just about inconvenience, it's about trust. Trust in a system that once seemed unshakable. That trust is eroding. So are consumer habits, and the deeply held belief that the global market exists to serve individual demand. Meanwhile, the logistics sector itself is struggling to hold together. These systems were designed for precision, not guesswork. Now, they're drowning in uncertainty. Warehouses are filling up with undeliverable goods. Tracking systems chase phantom shipments. Customer service teams have run out of explanations and are left apologizing for a mess they didn't cause. And it all stems from a policy that was launched without a roadmap. It's like someone yanked the steering wheel at 80 miles an hour and expected the truck to keep going straight. But the most fragile element of any market isn't infrastructure, it's confidence. You can rebuild warehouses and update shipping protocols. But once consumers begin to doubt the entire process, once they stop believing the system works, you've got a much deeper problem than just a shipping delay. You've got a full-blown credibility crisis. This isn't just a policy change, it's a stress test of the entire system. And the cracks aren't just appearing, they're spreading. Not long ago, 4 million packages moving into the US every day was such a normal number that no one thought twice about it. Now, every package is a risk, a complication, a cost. This is no longer just a logistics issue. It's a broader crisis of confidence in America's role in the global consumer economy. And maybe, just maybe, it's the beginning of the end of that familiar habit. Click, and it shows up. Meanwhile, tensions with neighbors Canada and Mexico reached a boiling point. Former President Trump had campaigned on lowering grocery prices, but his administration's sweeping tariffs on imports from both countries sent shockwaves through North America. Frustrated by what he described as years of unfair treatment, Trump announced a 25% tariff on all goods from Canada and Mexico. These weren't just economic penalties, they were messages, loud and clear. Play by our rules or pay the price. Within 72 hours, the consequences hit hard. What was meant to be a unifying moment, a historic handshake between Canada and Mexico, was shattered. A 35% retaliatory tariff followed, described by some as an economic death sentence. But the real shock wasn't the size of the tariffs. It was how easily Trump unraveled that alliance. Not with threats, but with a single letter. It wasn't diplomacy, it was desperation, an ultimatum cloaked in silence. The justification? National defense, border chaos, and a flood of illicit goods. But beyond the headlines, the message was unmistakable. You're either with us or you pay. Canada wasted no time responding. Within hours, it fired back with its own 25% tariffs, targeting $155 billion worth of American exports. This wasn't negotiation. It was retaliation, swift, strategic, and severe. The fallout didn't fade, it exploded. And amid the chaos, a new plan began to take shape. Not born of unity, but of mutual panic. Canada's top officials rushed to Mexico City. The media captured smiles and staged solidarity, but behind closed doors, the mood was anything but warm. These were two economies clinging to each other, not out of trust, but out of necessity. Trump didn't escalate, he outmaneuvered. Rather than unleashing more tariffs, he used the fine print of the USMCA trade agreement against them. Selective enforcement, strategic exemptions, and just like that, cracks formed in the so-called alliance. Canada took the full hit. Mexico was granted a delay, a brief lifeline, 90 days to renegotiate. But that lifeline came with a catch. Beneath every meeting, every statement, there was a harsh reality. Neither country could afford to walk away from the US. Canada relies on American demand, like a spine relies on a backbone. Over 70% of its exports go south. Mexico is even more entangled. 3/4 of its trade flows through US territory daily, moving more than $1 billion in goods each day. In the end, this moment isn't just about tariffs, shipping delays, or online shopping hassles. It's a wake-up call. One that questions the foundations of global trade, America's central role in it, and the fragile alliances that held it all together. And while headlines focus on numbers and policies, the real story is playing out in the background. In the decisions of foreign governments, in the hesitation of consumers, and in the recalibration of a world that may no longer see America as the only market that matters. The North American alliance was never rooted in strength. It was built on fear. And Trump didn't need to destroy it outright. He simply reminded everyone that he controls the oxygen they breathe. In Canada, the economic hit didn't just show up in financial reports, it hit real people. From farmers to factory workers, the impact felt more like a tidal wave than a ripple. That's when emotions took over. Nationalism flared. Protests broke out. The US anthem, once a symbol of shared values, became a trigger, an anthem of defiance. The alliance had been signed in front of cameras, but the real story was playing out behind the scenes. Two countries waking up to a painful truth. Unity without leverage is just a fragile headline waiting to collapse. Trade wars aren't just numbers on a spreadsheet or lines in a policy memo. They show up at kitchen tables, in empty storefronts, at border checkpoints, and in national identity. In Canada, the retaliation went beyond economics. It turned cultural. What started as a government response quickly grew into something much bigger, a national awakening. 3 words captured the movement: Buy Canadian. It began as a hashtag, but turned into a mindset. American brands lost loyalty overnight. Restaurants, tech firms, logistics companies tied to the US all became collateral damage in a war they never signed up for. Then came the silence, the absence. From April to September 2025, the number of Canadian tourists visiting the US fell by over 70%. Border towns and tourist hotspots across America, from Florida to California, were stunned. Hotels stayed open. Beaches stayed sunny. But the Canadians stopped coming. This wasn't a boycott. It was heartbreak. One Toronto man summed it up in a sentence that resonated across social media. The Trump tariffs made something snap in us. Many of us see this rift as beyond repair, and that may have been the most dangerous fallout of all. While politicians smiled for photo ops under chandeliers, the people had already emotionally moved on, ideologically, and even economically. The cracks weren't just in the alliance, they were in the foundation. Tourism boards scrambled, airlines cut routes, local businesses that once depended on Canadian visitors watched their lifeline disappear. But no press release could undo what had become a psychological shift. Canada wasn't just diversifying trade, it was rethinking its national identity, and that's where geopolitics quietly changes. Because when the people start to emotionally detach, when a neighbor becomes a source of pressure instead of partnership, restoring diplomatic trust becomes a long, uphill climb. The world watched as 2 governments tried to hold their alliance together. But the people, they flinched first. And when trust is lost on the ground, policy can't fix it with a pen. As the dust began to settle, retaliation gave way to recalibration. Canada and Mexico responded not with fury, but with strategy. Under rising domestic pressure, Canadian Prime Minister Carney made a calculated move. A temporary pause on retaliatory tariffs, at least for products already compliant with USMCA terms. Officially, it was framed as a step toward de-escalation. Unofficially, it was a door cracked open, an opportunity to resume dialogue before the damage became permanent. But it wasn't surrender, it was strategy. Behind the scenes, Ottawa and Mexico City intensified their coordination, not just economically, but politically. Joint statements, coordinated visits, symbolic gestures. A new playbook was taking shape, collective leverage instead of fragmented resistance. If Washington wanted compliance, it would now have to negotiate with a bloc, not 2 vulnerable voices. Mexico followed a similar path, firm but measured. Tariffs came, but so did clear messaging. This wasn't about emotion. It was about sovereignty and survival. Mexico made it clear, we may bend, but we won't break, and we won't stand alone. Then, another front opened, inside the US itself. High-profile business leaders like Mark Cuban and Shopify's Tobias Lütke didn't mince words. They called the trade war reckless, warning of deep disruptions to US supply chains and potential job losses across multiple sectors. These weren't partisan attacks. They were alarms from the heart of American industry. Economists echoed those concerns. Analysts at Business Insider warned that prolonged tariffs wouldn't just hit foreign economies, they could drag the US into stagflation, rising prices, stagnant growth, and a disillusioned consumer base. Reuters reminded everyone of a critical detail lost in the noise. The USMCA review was coming up next year. Without stability, renegotiations would become a political minefield. Tariffs may be temporary, but broken trust is much harder to repair. So, the strategy shifted. The shouting stopped. The signaling began. And as the temperature cooled, the stakes only rose higher. because what happens next won't be measured in tariff percentages or headline soundbites. It will be reflected in how these three nations, Canada, Mexico, and the United States, redefine trust, reshape alliances, and reset the balance of power in a post-crisis North America. The tariff war may have started with one spark, but it spread like wildfire, cutting across industries, economies, and identities. This wasn't a single breakdown. It was a series of shockwaves, peeling apart the very fabric of North American integration. Trade was just the first domino. As new tariffs stacked one on top of another, the logic of free movement began to collapse. The once fluid supply chain buckled under the weight of uncertainty. Few sectors felt the strain more than automotive, energy, and agriculture. Assembly lines slowed as imported parts became too expensive to justify. Canadian oil and gas, once routed efficiently to US refineries, got tangled in contractual chaos. Farmers on both sides of the border watched formerly stable markets turn into financial traps as costs soared beyond profit margins. But even this trade, energy, manufacturing, was just the surface. The deeper issue was trust. And when trust breaks, no amount of policy can restore it overnight. Tourism was the next casualty, and this time, the damage hit home in America. As Canadian travelers pulled back en masse, US tourist destinations, from Manhattan's shops to Arizona's luxury resorts, felt the sting. But this wasn't a small dip in traffic. It was a collapse. A 70% drop in Canadian visitors didn't just hurt, it devastated. Billions in revenue vanished. Tens of thousands of tourism-related jobs disappeared, quietly and quickly. There were no protests, no boycotts, just silence. And in a service-driven economy, that kind of absence speaks louder than any demonstration. The economic pain was only part of the story. What followed was the social aftershock, something no trade agreement could have predicted. In Canada, the initial retaliation against tariffs evolved into something deeper: emotional disengagement. What started as a pushback became a shift in national identity. Buy Canadian wasn't just a campaign slogan, it became a cultural mindset. It changed the way people shopped, shifted brand loyalty, and drew an invisible line between us and them. A division Canada hadn't felt since the days of the Cold War. But perhaps the most surprising transformation happened in politics. Prime Minister Carney, long viewed as a cautious centrist, suddenly took on a more assertive tone. By selectively pausing tariffs and strategically partnering with Mexico, he flipped the narrative. It wasn't retreat, it was a calculated reset. That renewed connection with Mexico became political capital, healing old diplomatic wounds and giving both countries a stronger front. What began as a trade dispute quickly morphed into something far bigger. Not just disruption, but a full-scale redefinition of supply chains, of alliances, of political identities. Canada and Mexico, once loosely aligned, began coordinating efforts. For a brief moment, it looked like a powerful counterweight to US dominance was forming. But before that alliance could solidify, Trump moved fast and hit harder. New rounds of tariffs were rolled out with precision, aimed at breaking the bond before it grew stronger. The impact was immediate. Tourism nosedived. Businesses suffered. National sentiment on all sides shifted. And across North America, the political map began to redraw itself. Now, the big question looms. Will this budding alliance between Canada and Mexico reshape the future of the USMCA? Or will it be remembered as a strategic misstep, ambitious but ultimately short-lived? Please subscribe to the Timefold channel, and don't forget to like and stay tuned for more in-depth coverage.